I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of metal scraping against asphalt and looked out my bedroom window to see a tow truck hauling my car away through 2 feet of fresh snow. The blizzard had finally stopped after dumping snow on our suburban Chicago neighborhood for nearly 18 hours straight. And apparently, the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association had decided this was the perfect time to enforce parking violations. I threw on my boots and coat, running outside in my pajama pants as the cold hit me like a physical blow. The temperature had to be somewhere around -5 degrees, not counting the wind chill. My breath came out in white clouds as I shouted at the tow truck driver, but he just pointed at a woman standing near the entrance to my cul-de-sac. She wore a puffy purple jacket and held a clipboard, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Excuse me," I called out, trudging through the snow that came up past my knees in some places. "That's my car. Why are you towing it?" The woman looked at me with the kind of expression that said she had been waiting for this confrontation and was going to enjoy every second of it. "Mr. Graham, I presume? I'm Patricia Winters, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board. Your vehicle was parked on the street in violation of our community guidelines." "There's a blizzard," I said, gesturing at the snow-covered landscape around us. "The city issued a no-travel advisory. I couldn't move my car even if I wanted to." Patricia consulted her clipboard like she was reading from a script. "According to Article 7, Section 3 of our HOA bylaws, no vehicles may be parked on the street between the hours of 2 a.m. and 8 a.m., no exceptions for weather." "That's insane. My garage is full because I'm renovating my basement and all my tools and materials are stored in there. Where was I supposed to put my car?" "That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Graham. The tow truck will take your vehicle to Morton's Impound on Route 43. You can retrieve it during their business hours. There's also a $200 fine from the HOA, plus whatever the impound charges." I stared at her, my face going numb from the cold. "You have got to be kidding me. Nobody could have moved their cars last night." The roads were completely impassable. The governor literally declared a state of emergency. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I counted 17 vehicles parked on the street this morning. We're towing every single one. Rules are rules, Mr. Graham. If we make exceptions, the entire system breaks down. Did you at least put out a warning, send an email or something? The rules are clearly stated in the HOA handbook that every resident receives upon moving in. Ignorance is not an excuse." She turned away from me, making a checkmark on her clipboard. "Have a nice day." I watched her walk away, my anger building with each step she took. The tow truck was already disappearing around the corner with my car. I pulled out my phone and called Morton's Impound, waiting through 4 rings before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Morton's. Hi, my car was just towed from Meadowbrook Hills. I need to know when I can pick it up." "Hold on." I heard papers shuffling. "What's the make and model?" 2019 Honda Accord Silver. More shuffling. "Yeah, we got it. You can come get it anytime. You'll need to pay the towing fee, storage fee, and administrative fee. Comes to $480. $480. It's been there for 10 minutes. Towing is $250, first day storage is $200, admin fee is $30. You want your car or not?" I closed my eyes and counted to 10. "The roads aren't even plowed yet. How am I supposed to get there?" "Not my problem, buddy." He hung up. I stood in my front yard, shivering and furious, as I watched Patricia move down the street to terrorize another neighbor. This was Philip Graham's life now, apparently. I had moved to Meadowbrook Hills 6 months ago because it seemed like a nice, quiet community about 30 miles northwest of Chicago. The houses were well maintained, the schools were good, and the property values were stable. Nobody had mentioned that the HOA was run by a tyrant with a clipboard and a god complex. My phone buzzed with a text from my girlfriend, Veronica Barnes. She lived in the city and had stayed at her apartment last night because of the storm. "Roads are still closed. Stay safe. Love you." I texted back, "HOA towed my car during the blizzard. Call you later." Then I went inside to warm up and figure out what the hell I was going to do. The house was cold because I had turned down the heat overnight, not expecting to have an emergency first thing in the morning. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, still wearing my coat. My hands shook a little as I opened my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws. Sure enough, there it was in Article 7, Section 3, exactly as Patricia had quoted. No street parking between 2 and 8 a.m., no exceptions listed. But there had to be something. You couldn't just enforce rules during a declared state of emergency. That was negligence at best and potentially illegal at worst. I had a law degree, though I worked in contract law for a tech company, not in homeowner disputes. Still, I knew enough to recognize when something didn't smell right. I spent the next 2 hours researching Illinois HOA law, emergency declarations, and relevant case precedents. The more I read, the angrier I got. There were multiple cases where HOAs had been sued for overreach during emergency situations. In one case out of Minnesota, an HOA had fined a resident for not shoveling their driveway during a blizzard, and the court had ruled in favor of the homeowner, stating that enforcement of non-emergency rules during a declared emergency constituted unreasonable application of HOA powers. My phone rang. It was my neighbor from across the street, David Chen. "Philip, did they tow your car too?" "Yeah, about 2 hours ago. Just now. I'm so angry I can barely see straight. My wife needs her car for work. She's a nurse at Lutheran General." "How is she supposed to get to the hospital?" "Did Patricia give you the same speech about rules being rules, word for word?" "She's got a whole crew with her. I saw at least 3 other tow trucks working the neighborhood. This is going to cost people thousands of dollars combined." An idea started forming in my mind. "David, would you be interested in filing a group complaint against the HOA? I've been doing some research and I think what they're doing is illegal." "Absolutely. Do you know how to do that?" "I'm a lawyer, just not this kind, but I can figure it out." "Let me make some calls and I'll send out an email to the neighborhood later today." After we hung up, I called my friend Marcus, who practiced civil litigation in Chicago. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding amused. "Philip Graham, what crisis brings you to my door today?" I explained the situation, speaking quickly as my anger reignited with each detail. Marcus listened without interrupting until I finished. "That's absolutely actionable," he said. "HOAs have broad authority, but it's not unlimited. Enforcing parking violations during a declared state of emergency when residents literally could not move their vehicles. That's unreasonable on its face. Plus, there's the question of notice. Did they provide adequate warning?" According to Patricia, the rules are in the handbook, so no additional warning is necessary. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's not how emergency situations work. Let me guess, your HOA president is one of those people who gets drunk on the tiny amount of power they have." "That's exactly what she is. I've dealt with cases like this before. Most of them settle quickly because the HOA's insurance company doesn't want to deal with the bad publicity. But if you really want to make a point, we could take it to court. Discovery alone would be worth it. We'd get to see all their internal communications, meeting minutes, financial records. What kind of damages could we recover? Actual damages would be your towing fees, impound fees, and any related expenses." but you could also argue for punitive damages given the egregious nature of the violation. The HOA acted with deliberate indifference during a state emergency. A jury would hate them. If we can get a class together with all the affected residents, we're talking potentially significant numbers. What would you charge for you? Because this sounds entertaining and I hate authoritarian HOAs, let's do contingency. 30% of whatever we recover and you cover the filing fees. If we lose, you're only out the court costs. If we win, everybody benefits. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. Let's do it. Excellent. Start documenting everything. Save every email from the HOA, take photos of the current conditions, get statements from neighbors. I'll draft a demand letter and we'll send it to the HOA board. We'll give them a chance to make this right before we file suit. Fair warning though, people like your Patricia usually double down instead of backing off. I'm counting on it. After hanging up with Marcus, I felt energized for the first time all morning. I took photos of my street, the snow depth, the lack of plowing. I screenshotted the state emergency declaration and the no travel advisory. Then I sent an email to the neighborhood listserv explaining what had happened and inviting anyone whose car had been towed to contact me. By noon, I had responses from 23 households. All told, 29 vehicles had been towed that morning. The stories were worse than mine. One elderly couple had their car towed, even though it was parked in front of their house, because one wheel was technically over the property line onto the street. A single mom with 3 kids had both of her vehicles towed because she and her teenage daughter had both parked on the street after being unable to navigate the unplowed driveway. The fury in those emails was palpable. People talked about missed work, medical appointments that couldn't be kept, hundreds of dollars in fees they couldn't afford. Patricia and her HOA board had created a genuine crisis in the middle of an emergency, and they didn't seem to care at all. I compiled all the information and sent it to Marcus, who called me back within an hour. "This is even better than I thought," he said. "Or worse, depending on your perspective. We've got elderly residents, medical emergencies, financial hardship. A jury is going to be furious." I'm drafting a demand letter now. We'll ask for full reimbursement of all towing and impound fees, rescission of all HOA fines, a formal apology and policy changes to prevent this from happening again. If they refuse, we file suit for actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. How much do you think the HOA has in their operating budget for a community your size? Probably somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000. Why? Because I want all of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's aggressive, I like it. If we can prove gross negligence or willful misconduct, we might actually be able to get there. Let me do some research on piercing HOA protections. This is going to be fun. The next day, the roads were finally passable enough for me to arrange a ride to Morton's Impound with David Chen, who had convinced his wife's coworker to drive them. The impound lot was a depressing stretch of chain-link fence and dirty snow on the outskirts of a partially industrial area. Inside the small office, a man with a cigarette hanging from his mouth barely looked up as we approached. "We're here to pick up our cars," I said. "Both were towed from Meadowbrook Hills yesterday morning." He grabbed 2 clipboards and slid them across the counter. "Fill these out, cash or card." "This is illegal, you know," David said. "Towing cars during a state emergency." The man shrugged. "Take it up with whoever called us. We just haul them where we're told. $4.80 each." I paid with my credit card, wincing at the charge. David did the same, and we trudged out to the lot to find our vehicles. My Honda was covered in road salt and sand, parked at an angle between 2 trucks. It took me 10 minutes to dig out enough snow to open the door. As I drove home, following David's car, I couldn't stop thinking about Patricia Winters standing in the snow with her clipboard, that satisfied look on her face. She had enjoyed enforcing those rules. The power trip was the entire point, and now she was about to learn that actions had consequences. Marcus's demand letter arrived at the HOA board's office 3 days after the towing incident. I knew because Patricia called me at 7 p.m. that evening, her voice shaking with rage. "Mr. Graham, I've received a very disturbing letter from an attorney claiming to represent you and several other residents. I want you to know that the HOA board considers this a frivolous and vexatious legal action. We have every right to enforce our community guidelines." "Even during a declared state of emergency?" I asked calmly. "The rules don't stop applying because of weather, Mr. Graham. We have a responsibility to maintain order and property values in this community. You towed 29 cars when the roads were impassable, and the governor had ordered people to stay off the roads. You caused financial hardship to dozens of families, prevented a nurse from getting to work at a hospital, and showed complete disregard for the safety and welfare of the residents you're supposed to serve." "I did my job." Her voice went up an octave. "Do you know how hard it is to keep a community like this running smoothly? Everyone wants to do whatever they want with no consequences. If I don't enforce the rules, chaos takes over. Property values drop. The entire community suffers. Patricia, you had cars towed during a blizzard. That's not maintaining order. That's a power trip. And now you're going to face the consequences of that choice. We have insurance for this kind of thing. Your little lawsuit doesn't scare me. Then I guess we'll see you in court. Have a good evening." I hung up feeling both satisfied and anxious. This was really happening. I was suing my HOA, and there was no going back now. Marcus filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later. The complaint was 47 pages long and listed every single violation, every single resident affected, and every single dollar of damages. We sued for reimbursement of all towing and impound fees, all HOA fines, consequential damages including lost wages and medical expenses, punitive damages for gross negligence and willful misconduct, and attorney's fees. The total came to just over $63,000, not counting the punitive damages which we left for the jury to determine. The lawsuit named the HOA as an entity, Patricia Winters individually, and all 7 members of the HOA board. Marcus explained that naming individuals would put pressure on the board members to settle, since their personal assets could potentially be at risk if we could pierce the corporate veil. "Most of them will want to settle immediately," Marcus said during a meeting at his office in downtown Chicago. "They're volunteers who didn't sign up to be personally sued. Patricia is the true believer. She'll want to fight, but if enough board members break ranks, they can overrule her. What are our chances if it goes to trial? Honestly, excellent. We have the state emergency declaration, the no travel advisory, photographic evidence of the conditions, and 29 sympathetic plaintiffs with documented damages. The HOA's defense is essentially that rules are rules. That's not a defense. It's an admission of unreasonable conduct." The HOA's response came 30 days later. They filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the lawsuit was frivolous and that the HOA had absolute authority to enforce its rules. Their attorney was a man named Robert Sheffield from a firm that specialized in HOA representation. His motion was aggressive and condescending, suggesting that we were entitled residents who wanted to live in a nice community without following any rules. Marcus's response, brief, was a thing of beauty. He systematically destroyed every argument cited case after case of HOAs being held liable for overreach, and included photos of the blizzard conditions alongside quotes from Patricia's own statements about having no sympathy for residents' hardships. He ended with a paragraph that made me want to applaud. The defendants would have this court believe that a homeowners association's authority is so absolute that it can enforce parking violations during a natural disaster. When the state governor has ordered residents to shelter in place, when roads are impassable, when elderly residents and medical professionals are among those affected, all without any warning or opportunity to comply. This is not the law in Illinois or anywhere else in the United States. An HOA is not a dictatorship. It is a community organization bound by principles of reasonableness, good faith, and the implied covenant to act in the best interests of its members. The defendants violated all of these principles. Their motion to dismiss should be denied. The judge denied the motion to dismiss 6 weeks later. Not only denied it, but included a footnote suggesting that the HOA's position was troubling and potentially indicative of a pattern of overreach that warrants full discovery. Marcus called me immediately. We won the first round, and the judge basically told them he thinks they're in the wrong. This is huge. Sheffield is going to advise them to settle. Will they? If they have any sense, yes. But sense isn't always common in HOA disputes. Discovery began in March. Marcus subpoenaed 5 years of HOA meeting minutes, financial records, all email communications between board members, complaints from residents, and records of previous enforcement actions. The documents started arriving in boxes, and what we found was even worse than I had imagined. Patricia Winters had been HOA president for 7 years. During that time, the number of fines issued had increased by 400%. She had personally pushed through rules about mailbox colors, lawn ornament sizes, acceptable shades of exterior paint, and even what type of doormats were permitted. Residents who questioned her were labeled as troublemakers in meeting minutes. In one email chain, she had written to another board member, "These people need to understand that living in a quality community means following rules, even when they are inconvenient. If they don't like it, they can move." More damning was the evidence that several board members had expressed concern about towing cars during the blizzard. One member, a retired accountant named Henry Walsh, had sent an email the evening before the towing saying, "Patricia, I really think we should postpone enforcement until the roads are clear and people have had a chance to move their vehicles. This feels unnecessarily harsh." Patricia's response, "We've postponed enforcement before and it sent the wrong message. Tomorrow we show everyone that the rules matter, regardless of circumstances. I've already contracted with the towing company." That email alone was worth its weight in gold. It proved that Patricia had been warned about the unreasonableness of her actions and had proceeded anyway. That was the definition of willful misconduct. Marcus also deposed Patricia and all the board members. Patricia's deposition was a disaster for their side. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, insisted that she had acted properly, and showed no empathy for the residents who had been affected. At one point, Marcus asked her if she thought it was reasonable to enforce parking rules when the governor had ordered people to stay off the roads. "The governor doesn't run Meadowbrook Hills," Patricia said. "I do. The board does. We have a responsibility that doesn't stop because of weather. Even when people physically cannot comply with the rules, everyone could have put their cars in their garages." Several residents had legitimate reasons for not being able to use their garages: medical equipment, renovation storage, repairs being done. Did you consider any of that? Those are excuses. There's always a way to comply if you really want to. Marcus let that statement hang in the air for a moment before moving on. Later, he told me that her complete lack of remorse or understanding would play beautifully to a jury. The other board members were more sympathetic. Most of them admitted that they had been uncomfortable with the towing but had deferred to Patricia's leadership. Henry Walsh, the retired accountant, was openly regretful. "I should have pushed back harder," he said during his deposition. "But Patricia has a strong personality, and she convinced us that we needed to make a statement about rule enforcement. I realize now that it was a mistake. I'm truly sorry for my part in this." By June, settlement negotiations began. The HOA's insurance company was willing to pay $30,000 to make the case go away. Marcus advised me to reject it. "We can get much more at trial. The evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor, and juries hate HOA overreach. Plus, the insurance policy has a limit of $100,000 for this type of claim. They're lowballing because they think you'll take the quick money." I talked it over with Veronica, who had been my sounding board through the entire process. We had gotten more serious over the past few months, partially because the lawsuit had consumed so much of my life, and she had been patient and supportive throughout. She sat across from me at her apartment, drinking wine while I explained the settlement offer. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to go to trial. This isn't really about the money anymore. It's about holding Patricia accountable. She's been terrorizing this community for years, and nobody has stood up to her. If we settle now, she'll just keep doing this to other people." Veronica smiled. "Then go to trial. Make her pay. Just don't let it consume your life completely. You've been obsessing over this for months." "I know, I'm sorry. Once this is over, I promise we'll take a vacation. Somewhere warm with no HOAs. I'm holding you to that." We rejected the settlement offer. The insurance company came back with $50,000. We rejected that too. By August, with the trial date approaching, they offered $75,000 and policy changes requiring the HOA to suspend enforcement during declared emergencies. Marcus thought it was a reasonable offer, but I wanted to push further. "What if we demanded Patricia's resignation as part of the settlement?" I asked. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "That's unusual but not impossible. The board has the authority to remove her. If we make it a condition of settlement, the insurance company might pressure them to do it. Let me float it and see what happens." The response was immediate and hostile. Patricia refused to resign, and she convinced enough board members to support her that the settlement talks broke down completely. Robert Sheffield sent a sternly worded letter stating that the HOA would not be blackmailed into removing a dedicated volunteer who had served the community faithfully for years. "She's going to lose everything," Marcus said after reading the letter. "Her ego won't let her back down, and it's going to cost the HOA dearly. At this point, I think we can get their entire operating budget." The trial began on September 15th at the Cook County Courthouse. Judge Martha Hendricks presided, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with a reputation for fairness and intelligence. The jury consisted of 8 people, 5 women and 3 men, ranging in age from late 20s to early 70s. Marcus's opening statement was powerful. He painted a picture of a community held hostage by an authoritarian HOA president who valued rules over people, order over compassion. He showed photos of the blizzard, read from the state emergency declaration, and introduced our plaintiffs one by one. The elderly couple whose car had been towed even though they had nowhere else to park it. The single mother who had missed 3 days of work because she couldn't get to her job. The nurse who had to call in sick to the hospital during a pandemic because the HOA had towed her car. "This case is about power and accountability," Marcus told the jury. "The defendants had power. They used it cruelly and without regard for the safety or welfare of the people they were supposed to serve. Now we're here to hold them accountable." To say that in America, even an HOA must act reasonably and in good faith. To say that rules without reason are tyranny, not governance. Robert Sheffield's opening statement tried to reframe the narrative. He talked about property values and community standards. He argued that the HOA had an obligation to all residents to maintain order, and that meant enforcing rules consistently. He suggested that a few hours of inconvenience shouldn't result in a massive lawsuit, but his argument fell flat when he tried to minimize the blizzard. "Yes, there was snow," he said, "but this is Chicago. We get snow every winter. These residents chose to live in a community with rules. They don't get to ignore those rules because of weather." I saw several jurors frowning. Marcus had been right. They hated this. The trial lasted 6 days. We called witness after witness, each one telling their story of hardship and frustration. We showed the email from Henry Walsh warning Patricia not to proceed with the towing. We played video from the day of the blizzard, showing that the roads were completely impassable. We had a meteorologist testify about the severity of the storm. We even called the police chief from our suburb, who testified that his department had responded to dozens of weather-related emergencies that day and had specifically advised residents not to drive unless absolutely necessary. Patricia took the stand on the 4th day. Marcus cross-examined her for 3 hours, and she never wavered from her position that she had done the right thing. She was defiant, unapologetic, and condescending. When Marcus asked her if she had any regrets, she said, "My only regret is that we didn't tow more cars. Some residents still think they can break the rules without consequences." The jury's reaction was visible. One woman in the front row actually shook her head in disbelief. Marcus's closing argument brought together all the threads of evidence and testimony. He spoke passionately about the role of community organizations and the importance of leadership that serves rather than dominates. Then he addressed damages. "We're asking you to send a message," he said. "A message that this kind of conduct is unacceptable. The HOA's operating budget is approximately $147,000. We're asking you to award that full amount in punitive damages, in addition to the $63,000 in actual damages." Why? Because anything less tells HOAs across the state that they can abuse their authority as long as they're willing to pay a small fine. We need to make it hurt. We need to make sure that no HOA president ever thinks they can do what Patricia Winters did here. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman was a middle-aged black woman who had been taking extensive notes throughout the trial. Judge Hendricks asked if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. In the case of Graham et al. Versus Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association et al., what say you?" "We find in favor of the plaintiffs on all counts. We award actual damages in the amount of $63,218. We award punitive damages in the amount of $150,000. We also award attorneys' fees and costs as requested." The courtroom erupted. Several of my fellow plaintiffs started crying. David Chen grabbed my shoulder and squeezed. I just sat there, stunned. We had won everything. More than everything. Patricia Winters stood up and stormed out of the courtroom. 2 other board members followed her, but the rest stayed seated, looking shell-shocked. After the judge dismissed the jury and set a date for a hearing on the injunctive relief, Marcus turned to me with a huge grin. "We did it. We actually got their entire operating budget plus some." What happens now? They'll appeal, probably. but our chances of having this overturned are minimal. The jury was well within its rights to award what it did. More likely, their insurance will pay the actual damages and attorney's fees, which means the punitive damages come entirely out of the HOA's pocket. They're going to be broke. Over the next few weeks, the reality of the verdict sank in for Meadowbrook Hills. The HOA couldn't function without operating funds. They couldn't pay for landscaping, snow removal, common area maintenance, or any of the services that kept the community running. An emergency meeting was called, and I attended via Zoom. The meeting was chaos. Residents were angry at Patricia, angry at the board, angry at the situation. Several people called for Patricia's immediate resignation. She refused, insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that this was all the result of entitled residents who wanted to destroy the community. Henry Walsh finally stood up and made a motion. I move that Patricia Winters be removed as president of the HOA board, effective immediately, for cause based on her mismanagement and the financial catastrophe her actions have created. The motion passed 7-1 with only Patricia voting against it. She sat there for a moment, red-faced and shaking, before standing up and pointing at the camera where she knew I was watching. "This is your fault, Philip Graham. You destroyed this community because you couldn't follow simple rules. I hope you're happy." "I am, actually," I said through the microphone. "You terrorized people for years, Patricia. You used your position to bully and control instead of to serve. This verdict wasn't about parking spaces. It was about accountability. And yes, I'm very happy that you're finally being held accountable." She logged off without another word. The board appointed Henry Walsh as interim president, and he immediately began reaching out to the plaintiffs to discuss restructuring and settlement. The insurance company paid the actual damages and attorney's fees within 30 days, and the HOA agreed to a payment plan for the punitive damages that would take them 3 years to pay off. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted more concrete changes. Marcus helped me draft a proposal that the board ultimately adopted. The new rules required that any enforcement action during a declared emergency be postponed until conditions normalized. They established an appeals process for residents who felt they had been unfairly fined. They required the board to provide written notice at least 48 hours before any towing. And they limited the president's authority, requiring board approval for any enforcement action that would cost a resident more than $100. Patricia tried to rally support among some of the older residents who had supported her strict rule enforcement over the years, but the lawsuit had revealed too much about her methods. The emails showing her contempt for residents who questioned her, the pattern of increasing fines and decreasing flexibility, the warning she had ignored before the blizzard towing. Most people who had supported her before quietly distanced themselves. 3 months after the trial, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia Winters standing on my porch, looking older and smaller than she had during the trial. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Can I help you?" I finally asked. "I wanted to say something to you," she said. Her voice was quiet, missing the aggressive certainty that had defined every previous interaction. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. The trial, the verdict, losing the board position. My husband thinks I should apologize to you." "But you don't think you should," she looked away. "I'm still not sure I did anything wrong by enforcing the rules, but I accept that the jury disagreed, and I accept that my approach caused people hardship. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm sorry you felt you had to sue. I'm sorry we couldn't work it out another way." It wasn't really an apology, but it was probably the closest Patricia could come to admitting fault. I considered being petty or vindictive, but standing there looking at this defeated woman, I just felt tired. Patricia, you had an opportunity to be a leader who brought people together. Instead, you chose to be a dictator who pushed people apart. That was always going to end badly. I hope you've learned something from this." She nodded slowly. "I loved this community. I wanted it to be perfect." Nothing's perfect, and trying to force perfection just makes everyone miserable. Communities are messy because people are messy. The best you can do is be fair, be reasonable, and actually care about the people you're supposed to serve." She didn't respond, just turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away and realized I felt something unexpected: pity. Patricia had destroyed herself through her own rigidity and inability to empathize with others. She had lost her position, her reputation, and probably most of her friendships in the community. The lawsuit hadn't just cost the HOA money. It had cost Patricia everything she thought defined her. I closed the door and went back to work, but I couldn't focus. Veronica came over that evening and I told her about Patricia's visit. "How did it make you feel?" she asked. "Honestly, sad." She's so convinced that she was right that she can't even properly apologize. She's going to carry this bitterness forever. Veronica took my hand. "You did the right thing, Philip. Not just for yourself, but for everyone in that community who was too scared or too tired to stand up to her." Sometimes holding people accountable is an act of compassion, even when it doesn't feel like it. I know, I just wish it hadn't been necessary. But it was, and you did it. Now you need to move forward and let this go. She was right. Over the next few months, life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly returned to normal. The HOA, under Henry Walsh's leadership, became more reasonable and more responsive to residents' concerns. The community actually felt like a community instead of a police state. Property values didn't collapse, despite Patricia's dire predictions. In fact, several new families moved in, attracted by the reasonable HOA policies and the sense that the community had corrected course. David Chen and I became good friends, bonding over our shared experience of standing up to the HOA. His wife, Jennifer, introduced me to several of her coworkers, expanding my social circle in the suburbs. I finished my basement renovation and was finally able to park in my garage again, though I occasionally left my car on the street just because I could. Veronica and I got engaged in December, almost exactly a year after the blizzard that had started everything. We were walking through downtown Naperville, looking at Christmas lights, when I stopped in front of a fountain and pulled out the ring I had been carrying for 2 weeks. "Veronica Barnes, you stuck with me through the craziest year of my life. You supported me when I was obsessed with this lawsuit. You talked me down when I got too angry, and you reminded me what actually mattered. Will you marry me?" She said yes, and we celebrated with dinner at an expensive restaurant where neither of us looked at the prices. Life was good. The lawsuit was over. Justice had been served, and I was moving forward with someone who loved me even when I was at my most difficult. The final chapter of the HOA saga came in March, when the Illinois state legislature passed a new law inspired in part by our case. The Homeowner Protection During Emergency Act required all HOAs in the state to suspend enforcement of non-safety-related rules during declared emergencies, and to provide written notice before any enforcement action that would result in financial penalties exceeding $100. The law also established a state-level appeals process for homeowners who felt their HOA had acted unreasonably. Marcus called to tell me about the new law, his voice filled with satisfaction. "You did this, Philip. Your case created precedent that led to real legislative change. That almost never happens." "We did this," I corrected. "I couldn't have won without you, true. But you were the one willing to stand up and fight. Most people would have just paid the fine and moved on. You turned it into something bigger. After we hung up, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sun set over my neighborhood. Spring was coming, the snow was melting, and everything felt new and full of possibility. The house I had bought 6 months before the blizzard now felt like home. Not because of the building or the yard or the location, but because I had fought for it. I had fought for my right to be treated fairly and reasonably, and I had won. Patricia Winters moved out of Meadowbrook Hills that summer. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she and her husband bought a condo in a building with no HOA. Henry Walsh continued as HOA president and did an excellent job, focusing on genuine community building rather than rule enforcement. The HOA slowly rebuilt its operating budget through modest increases in dues and more careful management of expenses. And I learned something important through the whole experience. Justice doesn't happen automatically. It happens when people are willing to stand up for themselves and for others, even when it's difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. It happens when you refuse to accept that powerful people and organizations can act with impunity. It happens when you believe that fairness and reasonableness matter more than blind obedience to rules. The tow truck hauling my car through the snow that cold February morning had seemed like a disaster. In a way, it was. But it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to hold a petty tyrant accountable, to change an unfair system, to create legal precedent that would protect others in similar situations. I hadn't asked for that opportunity, but once it came, I had refused to back down. Veronica and I got married in October, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard with close friends and family. During his toast, David Chen joked that he never would have introduced us if he had known I was the type to sue the HOA. Everyone laughed, including me. Because by then, enough time had passed that the whole thing felt almost surreal. Had I really sued my HOA for their entire operating budget? Had I really won? Had a jury really awarded us $213,000? Yes. Yes to all of it. And while I wouldn't want to go through it again, I also wouldn't change what happened. Sometimes the right thing to do is difficult. Sometimes standing up for yourself means making enemies and spending months focused on a legal battle that consumes your time and energy. But the alternative is accepting injustice, and that's a cost I'm not willing to pay. The snow came again that winter, another big storm that dumped 18 inches on Meadowbrook Hills overnight. I woke up early and looked out my window at the pristine white landscape, my car safely parked in my garage where it belonged. And I smiled, thinking about how different this was from the year before. My phone buzzed with a text from Henry Walsh, who had sent a message to all residents. Due to the winter storm, all HOA rule enforcement is suspended until conditions improve and roads are clear. Please stay safe and help your neighbors if you can. That was leadership. That was what an HOA was supposed to be. And the fact that it took a lawsuit and a $200,000 verdict to get there was sad, but at least we had gotten there. I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, planning to catch up on work emails before the day got busy. But instead, I found myself writing down the whole story of the lawsuit, from the moment I saw the tow truck through my window to the jury's verdict to Patricia's resignation to the new state law. I wrote for hours, barely noticing when Veronica came downstairs and started making breakfast. "What are you working on?" she asked, reading over my shoulder. "Just documenting what happened. I figure someday our kids might want to know the story of how their dad sued the HOA." She laughed. "That's going to be quite a bedtime story. It's a story about standing up for yourself." about not accepting that people with a little bit of power can abuse it without consequences. I think that's an important story. It is, and I'm proud of you for living it, even though it was stressful and crazy. I saved the document and closed my laptop, turning to give her my full attention. You know what the best part of the whole thing was? Winning $200,000. No. The best part was learning that I could fight, that I didn't have to just accept unfair treatment, that I had the skills and the courage and the support to take on something bigger than me and win. That's worth more than any amount of money. Veronica kissed my forehead. You're going to be impossible to live with now, aren't you? Fighting every injustice you see, probably. But you love me anyway. I do. God help me, I really do. We spent the rest of the morning together, watching the snow fall and planning our future. We talked about buying a bigger house eventually, maybe moving to a neighborhood without an HOA. We talked about kids and careers and all the normal things that people building a life together talk about. The lawsuit had been all-consuming for a year, but now it was just a story. An important story, a formative story, but still just one chapter in a much larger life. When I look back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder if I would have sued if I had known how much time and energy and emotional investment it would require. If I had known that it would dominate my life for a year, that I would spend hundreds of hours researching and preparing and strategizing, that I would lie awake at night worrying about the outcome. Would I have just paid the $480 and moved on? I honestly don't know. But I'm glad I didn't have that foreknowledge, because it meant I fought. And fighting meant winning. And winning meant change, not just for me, but for every homeowner in Illinois who would be protected by the new law. It meant justice for 29 families who had been wronged. It meant accountability for an HOA that had operated without oversight for too long. The last time I saw Patricia Winters was purely by accident. Veronica and I were having dinner at a restaurant in downtown Chicago when I noticed her sitting at the bar alone, nursing a glass of wine. She looked up and our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she might come over, might say something, but she just gave a small nod of acknowledgement and looked away. That felt right somehow. We had nothing left to say to each other. The lawsuit had said everything that needed to be said. As Veronica and I walked back to our car after dinner, hand in hand through the cold Chicago night, I felt genuinely content. The fight was over. Justice had been served, and life had moved on to bigger and better things. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Not revenge, not destruction, but accountability and change and the knowledge that you stood up when it mattered. The story of how I sued my HOA and won their entire operating budget became something of a legend in suburban Chicago legal circles. Marcus used it as a case study in his continuing legal education classes. Other lawyers called asking for advice on similar cases. I even gave a talk at a community organization meeting about homeowner rights and HOA overreach. But for me, it was never about becoming famous or making a point beyond my own community. It was about that moment when I saw my car being towed during a blizzard and felt the unfairness of it deep in my gut. It was about refusing to accept that unfairness. It was about believing that I deserved better, that my neighbors deserved better, and that we had the power to demand better in the end. That's what justice is. Not an abstract concept or a legal principle, but the practical application of fairness and accountability. It's the belief that people shouldn't be able to abuse power without consequences. It's the willingness to fight even when the fight is hard and the outcome is uncertain. It's the courage to stand up and say, "This is wrong," and then do something about it. I sued my HOA during a blizzard without warning and won their entire operating budget. But more than that, I won something intangible but infinitely more valuable. I won the knowledge that I could stand up for myself and others. I won precedent that would protect people I would never meet. I won a community that was healthier and more reasonable than the one I had sued. And I won the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win. That's a story worth telling. That's a story worth living. And that's a story that starts with a tow truck in a snowstorm and ends with justice, accountability, and real meaningful change. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was worth it. Every frustrating moment, every anxious night, every hour spent preparing for trial. All of it was worth it for the moment when that jury forewoman said, "We find in favor of the plaintiffs," and I knew that we had actually won. So if you ever find yourself facing down an unjust HOA or any other organization that has power over your life, remember this story. Remember that you have rights. Remember that you have options. Remember that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has authority. And remember that sometimes when you fight back, you actually win. Not always, not easily, but sometimes. And that possibility, that chance at justice, is worth fighting for.